Good
afternoon and welcome to the beginning of the third week of our 28-day challenge when members of the wider Westport and Weston community and perhaps beyond are reading Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy. I am the Reverend Alison Patton, and I'm the pastor of Saugatuck Congregational Church, United Church of Christ here in Westport.
And I am Jenny Nelson. I am the Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Westport Country Playhouse.
And I'm Harold Bailey. I'm Chair of Team Westport. And we really want to welcome you all, not only to the video drop, but we want to congratulate you on making it halfway through at this point. You have now seen 14 of the 28 perspectives on white supremacy that Layla Saad actually lays out inside of her book, Me and White Supremacy. After 14 of these, it's easy at this point to start feeling like, my God, what is going on here? Especially if you're new to the work and this is kind of an entry. It's one thing after another, after another, after another, and we're only halfway through. And so what we've gotten in terms of attitudes and some of the questions that we've received from a number of folks is, I'm starting to feel like there's no way I can fix the problem. There's no way I can address all these things at one time. So why should I continue this? Why should I? And that's why we need to step back a little bit and look at the value of what you're doing. And just to state very clearly, there is nothing more important than your own personal awareness of every one of these perspectives and any other perspectives you can get as well. And what do I mean by that? Why is that important? The fact that you are actually aware means that whether you said anything or not, you're able to address issues with other people around you who may not be BIPOC, as an example. And for people who are BIPOC, all of a sudden you at least become a potential ally, someone who understands what they're going through, someone who sees what's going on that most people around you may be oblivious to. That's a huge step forward, not just for you, but for the people around you, and certainly for the BIPOC people around you as well. So it's something you ought to feel very proud of, and it's something that you ought to feel really excited about and exhilarated about getting that awareness is more than half the battle as far as I'm concerned. When you have that awareness, you're going to be able to pass on some of that awareness to the people that you come in contact with, to your friends, to your family, to your children, your grandchildren, and nieces and nephews, and so on. And all of that is part of that layer of supremacy or anti-racism that they will be dealing with in the future. So just your personal involvement is a huge deal. And we really want to recognize that now and ask that you continue to keep that in mind as you go through the remaining 14 perspectives on this.
Harold, as you were expressing that appreciation when we were talking, it reminded me of the subtitle in Layla's book, that this is about becoming a good ancestor. And we haven't talked a lot about that, but she lifted it up when she spoke, and I'm so riveted by the idea that the work that we're doing is for our families and our next generations, which you lift up. I don't know if you heard her say more about that idea when you were talking with Layla Saad prior to her Sunday presentation.
Well, I'll just say that was kind of the energy behind everything she was mentioning. So the whole reason for all the different perspectives. And by the way, she said, our question was, do you have more than 28? She goes, oh yeah, I've got quite a few more, but we're starting with these and they're important. But that is the whole idea, that you are not one of 1,000 points of light as an example, but you're more of a, I could call it a spotlight that overlaps the other spotlights that might be out there. You actually could turn on other points of light with what you do and how you operate. It's more, to me, I know the Kendi approach is let's go look at policies and try to get systemic racism tackled. And that's something you can do visibly as a group and as an individual. What you can't necessarily keep track of is how everybody is doing inside themselves. They're at it. And that's why this is so important to me, because it's, what do I really feel? What am I really doing? What am I personally making happen? That's where you get to the bottom of the whole thing and you start to get it straightened out. It's not by some rule that the culture put together as much as what do we think inside and how do we feel inside about each other.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And that was the core of becoming a good ancestor. I think that she was.
I
Yeah.
love that. Thank you. So keep breathing and keep reading. That's what I'm hearing. This is an impactful undertaking, even if it feels overwhelming on some days.
Amen. There
I
you
love
go. Well, and we also had a really good question here as well.
We did, yeah. We've gotten some great questions from our community, so we wanted to share one of them. So knowing that we're supposed to be self-reflective in this journey, which Harold was just talking about, how do I break white silence, especially with relatives and friends, without being confrontational? That's a great question.
Yeah, and isn't that one of those questions that we hear again and again, right? It came up often in the class that several of us took, the workshop that was offered through Temple Israel back in the fall. And I want to just offer a challenge as we start to lean into that question. Maybe respond to the question with another question, which is, when you find yourself in that moment where you're worried about being confrontational, ask yourself, who am I protecting and who am I worried about making uncomfortable? Because we who are white tend to expend a lot of energy in protecting other white folks from discomfort. It may be our own discomfort at bringing up the topic. It may be our worry that we are making our friend or colleague who is white uncomfortable. And that worry may prevent us from calling out language or behavior or perspectives which are doing harm to people of color. So before we dig into a response to this question, I just invite you, whenever you find yourself in that moment, worrying that you might be creating a confrontation, to ask yourself inside your own head and your heart, who is vulnerable here? And who am I trying to protect by my silence or by my words? There's a starting place. I think Layla Saad actually talks about this. There's a whole chapter, right, on white silence.
Yes, there is. And I always enjoy being able to go back to this brilliant work and give you some of Layla's words in reference to white silence. I know Alice and I were talking about how this particular paragraph really resonated for both of us in the way she succinctly gives us this call to action. So here is the radical idea I would like for you to understand. White silence is violence. It actively protects the system. It says, I'm okay with the way things are because they do not negatively affect me and because I enjoy the benefits I receive with white privilege. I'll just say that again. White silence is violence. Sit with that. I know I had to sit with that for a while the first time I read it. I know, Allison, you had the similar experience.
So hear it and sit with it and then take a deep breath because we do actually then want to try to identify some tools together for speaking up in ways that are helpful and constructive and work towards dismantling racism. So let's think about some of those tools together. The first thing that strikes me is that it does take practice. When you're interviewing for a job, you probably practice the responses to your questions before you walk into that job interview. If you're going to propose to someone, you may well rehearse the words that you're going to use in the proposal, right? When we are in important moments in our lives, we, not always, but often rehearse them. So find somebody else who's doing this good work with you, another white person, and try out some of the responses that that come to mind, and brainstorm with one another. How can I call out racism, racist language, behaviors, or attitudes in ways that are constructive? And try them out on each other. What else, Jenny, helps us
Yeah.
rather than being silent?
And we were just talking too about, we're so fortunate to live in a time where there are so many great resources to call on to help us in these moments when we're attempting to disrupt racism and dismantle it. And, one of the calling in and calling out are two techniques that can be helpful. So, calling out is pretty self-explanatory in the way that if we encounter a racist language, a racist action, that we call it out and call it by name in the room directly to that person. So we don't say that here. That is not okay with us. What you're saying is racist. To really call it out and call it by name, right? Calling someone out in the room. And calling someone in has some variation. Calling someone in can be taking a moment to maybe after that moment to call them, to email them, to connect with them, to not call them out in that moment. It's a strategy based on how you think you might affect this person or affect change. And sometimes the strategy can be to call them in a different way. Another way to call someone in the room in that moment is to say something like, I've been on a journey of learning. And here's something that I've learned that you may not be aware of, and I want you to come with me on this journey, right? To learn about and whatever you want to disrupt in that moment. So in that way, you're having them join you with a sense of humility that we're all trying to learn to be a good ancestor, right? To do better. And so you're calling them in that way. So both those strategies can be helpful depending on the situation.
Yeah, so this is the alternative to finger wagging, right? It's about practicing a tone that is invitational when that's appropriate. And there may be occasions when a straight up naming of problematic behavior is what's called for. But I love that I language. I love that saying, here's something that I'm wrestling with. Here's something that I'm learning, and it's new or newish to me. So maybe it's new to you too. Let me tell you about it and why this language doesn't help us. As we talked about calling in and calling out and whether to do it in the moment or after the fact, one of the things that Harold and Jenny and I reflected on is how that response impacts people of color who may be in the room. And so I asked Harold to reflect a little bit on the experience of having someone call out racist language or behaviors in his presence. Now, we're doing this work together and grappling with these questions and have been doing it for some time. And Harold has a teaching role in this setting that he has chosen. I want to say that because we've already noted the fact that we don't want you necessarily to go find your best friend who's a person of color and ask, what should I do in this moment, right? There needs to be a relationship first, and there needs to be an invitation. In this case, Harold has invited us to be in dialogue with him. So Harold, can you share a little bit about your observations about what it means for somebody to speak up or not in a moment when racist language or attitudes are being expressed?
Well, and as we've talked about, it very much depends on the environment you're in. If you're in a work environment, as an example, where you have someone who is a manager, as an example, who is, or an exec, and you're a group of managers, and the exec says something really offensive or stupid. Just calling it, what I've always thought is just the idea of calling it out, but by saying, asking a question, repeating the question or repeating the comment and saying, well, what do you mean by that? Or wow, is that, do you really mean that? That kind of a question, without necessarily, as we said before, without us necessarily trying to finish things up at the time, that at least puts on the table the fact that it's of concern and it should be considered later on. It also, the thing you have to also keep in mind though is that a natural reaction for a number of people in that situation is to turn to the BIPOC person and say, I'm not a racist, am I? Are you upset by my saying that? And that, so you also have to take that into consideration with what you say when you say it in the way that you say it. In general, my attitude is going to be, or depending on who it is and what you know about their personalities, you may come back with all kinds of different responses. The whole idea here is you have to know your personality. You have to know the personalities of the other people that are involved and the potential chemistry that's going to be there. That says, if that sounds complicated, it isn't. It's just, you got to go with your gut feel about what's going to work in that environment. But it really does help to put a marker in there that says, we ought to talk about this at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I love that, Harold. And when you say that, what I hear is that combating white silence means starting the conversation, but you don't have to finish it right there in the moment, right? That naming it might be enough. And then you finish that calling in process that Jenny was describing, where you follow up with the person individually afterwards. But in the meantime, the person of color in the room benefits from hearing that someone has named it, right? Even if it's not going to get sorted out in the moment. That's really helpful. So add to your list. You can start the conversation without needing to finish it right there in the moment. I find that really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. This work is never finished.
Yeah.
Yeah, the work continues.
Right. Yeah.
And the other thing to keep in mind in terms of, I think you said earlier that white people actually understand how not to say anything to keep people comfortable. Well, the truth is people of color understand the same thing.
Right.
So if you're in a group where you're not the majority as a person of color, you understand how to navigate around the discussions that might be tough discussions, or calling something out. You understand there's a risk to doing that at the moment when you're in this conversation. Mm-hmm. So don't be surprised if you see someone of color kind of dodge getting back to following up on something like that in the moment when you're in a conversation, because the focus may be getting a business deal done, or it may be getting some other objective accomplished when this other thing kind of popped up out of nowhere. So just that's part of the complexity.
That's a helpful. Yeah. What that says to me, Harold, is it reminds me that if I'm choosing to speak up, it goes back to those I statements, that I need to speak up on my own behalf and not say, that's really harmful to Harold, and he's going to tell you why. Right.
There he is.
Right. That part of the dynamic is affording people of color the space to speak up or not in a given moment, but that I can speak for myself and say, here's what I hear, and here's the journey that I'm on.
And I liked Harold. Forgive me, Harold. What were you saying?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'm hearing in it too, talking about hierarchies in the room, right? Mm-hmm. This idea that we can be in a very important business meeting or a very important family dinner, or all kinds of things that have these layers of hierarchies in the room, and how important it is for us to still call people out, right? But that's a difficult decision, right? And being practiced, like Alison was talking about, is only going to help us in those situations, and how important it is for anyone to speak out, but more importantly, in the hierarchies and the most powerful people in the room, your bosses, for those people to call others out, right? To model that is so vitally important in the room, right? From the top down, that we're modeling this behavior, but also that anyone in the room feels the same amount of power to do that, right? That we can all call someone out wherever we are. I think it's important. It's hard work. It's not easy.
So as we were brainstorming some of the other responses, Jenny and I thought of techniques that we have learned in other contexts, just doing facilitation work and doing brainstorming work or team building work. There's a technique called 2+, which involves naming 2 positive things before then offering a feedback or a critique. So this will not always be appropriate. Again, there will be times when you just need to call out bad behavior, offensive or racist language or action. But there may be occasions where you're doing work with a group of folks who are committed to doing this work together, and nonetheless something goes sour and there's an offensive statement made or action proposed. So you use 2+ by saying 2 positive things. I love your commitment to community building, and I love that you're trying to think creatively and out of the box. My concern is that taking all of the brown children and putting them in a room together may not achieve that goal. Right? This is, I'm just being hypothetical here, but you hear how a 2+ can function. So when you're in conversation at the Thanksgiving table or with your friend over coffee and they say something that's troubling, you might say, think of 2 positive things that you can say that are relevant to the moment, and then say, my concern is that language or that idea does damage in this way, right? And that can give you sort of an entree into some conversation. Jenny had another technique from the classroom that I loved.
Coming from being a teacher and working with all ages of students, I like this idea we're talking about, Alison, because it opens the door to listening, right? That active listening that really needs to happen in these conversations. So if someone is stating something to you and you're actively listening and you're giving them those 2+, so that they're going to listen back, right? They're going to want to receive what you're saying. And you're kind of setting it up for success, hopefully. Something we've done in the classroom, which a lot of my teachers out there will know this very well. It's the I like, I notice, I wonder. So maybe when working with young adults or even adults, this can be a really interesting technique with I really like, ... I noticed, ... and I wonder. And then that's when you're going to actually structure it to something that could change. I wonder if next time, I wonder if you thought about this, this could change your perspective. Or I wonder if you read this amazing book, if that would help your perspective, right? Giving them a tool. People like tangible tools, and resources. So that's a way to structure it, much in the vein of constructive criticism, where we're giving things to people to help them. I always say if we're giving a feedback, it's with love, because we love them and we care about them and we want them to be better, right? We want ourselves to be better. And so and that can't always work. Sometimes we are calling people out and that has to center from a different place. But this kind of gives us a chance to really listen to each other, and hopefully they'll feel like they can respond honestly, which is really important, right? That people aren't giving us pat answers to make us feel better as well. That they're really feeling they can be honest about what they need to learn, where they're confused, what they're feeling. Never negating what people are feeling during this process can be really helpful for all of us.
Right. It's a reminder of something that you all know because you've been experiencing it as you go through these 2 weeks, which is that this is vulnerable work. And we need to do it anyway. And it is disruptive work, and we need to do it anyway. And it will make us and others uncomfortable sometimes. And we need to do it anyway. So what did we just come up with? Practice, try some stuff out. You can start the conversation without needing to finish it. Just put something out there to set the tone. Use I language, calling in and calling out, right, depending on the moment. And that's related to I language. Let me tell you about the journey I'm on and what I'm learning. The 2+ strategy and the I like, I notice, I wonder strategy of inviting into conversation. Jenny, Harold, what else? There's anything that we wanted to lift up that we've missed?
Just stay at it.
Yeah.
Yes, stay at it indeed. Keep doing the work.
Yeah.
Lean in, right? As we've said in all these weeks, lean into the discomfort, lean in, feel your feelings, acknowledge those feelings. And I just want to go back to practicing. In anything in life, we want to practice to get better. And sometimes I think in this work, we set ourselves an expectation of I have to be perfect at this right now, or I'm never going to be helpful. And that's simply not how we work as humans, right? We have to practice these things. So I really like Alison's idea of finding someone that is also doing this work, right? Another white person that is doing this work, or that you feel you could have these honest conversations with, and practice, come up with tools, come up with solutions. So when the moment is there, you feel prepared to be helpful, to be a good ancestor in that moment.
Love it.
Which we're all trying to do, right? We're all trying to do that.
Right. And I think we want to err on the side of speaking up, right?
Even if it's wrong, you said something, right? It can't be wrong.
It's
right?
what we're trying to do is combat that silence, which does violence.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're trying to combat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The complicity in the silence, right? That we're complicit if we're not speaking up.
Silence is not golden.
Yeah. It's really not. Yeah.
No. So we are continuing on this journey with you, going into our next week. We also, again, the resources there, please email us. We love to receive your questions and be useful to you on this journey if we can be, and help each other in the same way. So please send your emails to education@westportplayhouse.org. Again, that's education@westportplayhouse.org. And we will do our very best to respond, and hopefully respond in our videos. So you're getting a nice comprehensive answer to your question. So everyone keep doing the work. Take care of yourself and each other. And we'll see you next week.
Take care.
Take care.